So let's start talking about chapter 4 of the places that scare you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Who got a chance to read the chapter? Anybody?
I
I
didn't
did.
finish the chapter, but I'm reading it.
No, I reread it
That's
this
okay.
this afternoon.
Okay, nice. Um, good. So, this chapter, which it's got its fun little title of "Learning to Stay," is all about meditation
And learning to stay.
and learning to stay. um, Pema calls meditation the natural seat in the home ground of the warrior bodhisattva. Those y'all may or may not recall, but she does call bodhisattva as a type of warrior throughout this book, um, and does refer to that quite a bit. And I love the emphasis on how, when pursued through proper practice, meditation cultivates that unconditional friendliness towards not just others but ourselves. Because I think I reflected while reading this that more than ever, I think people are harsher with themselves or very negative with themselves. I see a lot of really dark self-directed emotions, not just in my friend groups or in the circles I go on online, but also amongst my students. I see them tell themselves some pretty dark narratives, and I wish I was in a position to encourage them towards this cultivation of unconditional friendliness towards themselves, because they certainly need, I think, more self-compassion. Because I believe, in small rant, is I think a lot of their poor behavior manifests from a poor sense of self, you know.
Mm.
So that's my perception of my students generally, at least.
I think you're right.
What I do like here, oops, where's my mouse? Is that she talks about how meditation helps us notice the gaps in our internal dialogue. Um, and I think that this is very true, because our internal dialogue doesn't need to just be, I need to get better, I need to do this, I need to do X, Y, Z. There's so much more to that compassion and acceptance and what comes with it, you know? My personal in-depth, well thought out processes actually start in another couple pages. And but I can continue to love how she says, I'm trying to, we experience moments of being right here that feel simple, direct, and uncluttered. And I think that that summarizes my personal sense of what meditation should feel like once I've done it, if that makes sense. She goes into this about people, I can't find the exact spot just yet, but I know she talks about people going into meditation expecting to feel happier after a meditation or feel more joy immediately, you know? When in reality, it's just to
To be,
simplify and declutter in many ways, right?
yeah, and to be with whatever is going on, and to really be open and look at our emotions and happenings, be they good or bad.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely.
I mean, I can understand how people would come into meditation thinking, like, oh, I'm supposed to, clear my thoughts and be happy.
Well, they think it's supposed to, yeah, they're supposed to be, they think it's supposed to be head empty, no thought,
Right.
as the meme goes.
Follow my bliss type stuff.
Mhm.
And, like, that's just not what meditation is.
Yeah.
I mean, it will happen, or I will. It will happen eventually, probably, but it's not what's necessary to
It is
get
a
started.
lovely bonus when it happens.
Yeah.
Right. It's kind of like
But
a nice side effect, but it's not the point.
mhm. Um I like that she calls it stepping out of a fantasy world and discovering the simple truth. Cuz I think it's really easy, especially I know I felt this way when I first kind of was like, "Ooh, Buddhism seems interesting." So when I first got interested in it, I definitely had a very romanticized idea about what it was going to mean to be somebody who practiced meditation and who was trying to strip away my ego, right? And
Hmm.
so I would say I definitely lived in a bit of a fantasy world in the beginning, and I might still in some ways, right? But um, every time I discover a little more of that simple truth, it's very liberating.
Hmm.
I shared this paragraph in chat because I thought it was, I'm going to say important. I don't know if that's
It
quite the word
is.
I meant.
No, you're right.
Yet there is no guarantee that sitting meditation will be of benefit. We can practice for years without its penetrating our hearts and minds. We can use meditation to reinforce our false beliefs. It will protect us from discomfort. It will fix us. It will fulfill our hopes and remove our fears. This happens because we don't properly understand why we are practicing. And that summarizes pretty much how I was trying to approach it, right? I was thinking this is going to cure my anxiety. This is going to um I'm going to be so at peace with everybody. I'm going to
Right.
let go of all this trauma I have.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't really, or at least for me, I really can't let go of these expectations. I mean, I think I am at a point where I can accept what's going on, but in the back of my mind, of course, there's always this hope that one day,
Mhm.
eventually, I will be, you know,
Be
at,
cured.
be cured at the supreme peace and whatnot.
Yeah. I'm right there with you, Ben. I really am. I use this quote and I say like, oh well, look, you fools. But the reality is, I too, when I sit in meditation, like there is a part of me that still hasn't let go of that attachment of like, oh, this is gonna be it. This is how I'm gonna finally have a brain that works.
No, the fucked up thing. I have tasted that sort of open-ended peace,
Mhm.
but that does not come, and it will not come until you stop chasing it.
Yeah.
It just won't. And
Yes.
as soon as you stop caring about it, then there it is, all of a sudden, as though it'd never been anywhere else. It's
Um.
frustrating.
Yeah. It is so frustrating. But don't assume you're doing it wrong. Just because you're not getting that doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Pema says pretty much, even the most, what does she call it, settled meditator experiences psychological and physical pain. Um, but then I have highlighted in my copy, meditation takes us just as we are with our confusion and our sanity,
Or
and
lack.
or lack thereof.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that that's a really good way to start seeing it because the meditation takes us that way, and that's what we're supposed to do, take ourselves as we are, not trying. And I love the way Pema words it in a couple of places, and I'm trying not to jump ahead and get confusing in the way I'm talking, but she just really hits the nail on the head with the fact that about the self-compassion required to not just constantly try to be fixing yourself even through meditation, right? It's you must take yourself in these thoughts and these coping mechanisms as they are and let them flow. And that's how you can start this really painful process. Oh, yeah, she says it right here. Trying to fix ourselves is not helpful. She even goes so far in one part. Oh yeah, a couple paragraphs down, she calls it renunciation without Maitri, Maitri,
Highlight
uh,
it.
Maitri.
Maitri. Oh gosh, right here. Here you go. Without
Matri.
Maitri, renunciation of old habits becomes abusive. And when I first read that, something kind of clicked about the way we do abuse ourselves, right? In this way. And I think as as she points out in another part somewhere, whose part I'm not 100% sure yet, is that sometimes these feelings get worse before they ever get better because I'm skipping ahead because right now she's focusing on steadfastness, and I'm going to jump ahead real quick to talk about clear sight, clear seeing, because she absolutely ties it in really well, I think, to this phrase of Maitri, but the renunciation of old habits becomes abusive, because with the clear seeing, you just start to see how bad you are at certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you just start to become really aware of all your failings. You know what I mean?
I, and yes, there's also a quote that is coming up where she says that going into the pain without that matri, without that self-compassion is just warfare.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, exactly. It is warfare. It's warfare on ourselves and
Mm.
probably against other people. um, gosh.
That's see. That's the thing. Like, it's in a way kind of amazing how you have to prepare your own mind to be able to meditate because
Mhm.
there's every chance in the world that if you go in, you'll just make things worse because
Yes.
you haven't been given this clear instruction of look, you gotta be ready to admit and accept where you are falling down. And if that's not present, you'll just be like, wow, I really am a fuck up. Huh? And it'll just spiral. But like
Yes.
that's so infrequently talked about in, the sort of Buddhist, New Age, whatever circles. Just find that interesting.
Yeah. I hate the highlight feature in this. Yeah. Then she goes on to define matri, because I know I wasn't super familiar with the word until I was reading this section. Um, there's four qualities of it that get cultivated when we meditate: steadfastness, clear seeing, experiencing our emotional stress, notably experiencing it, not subduing it, not repressing it, experiencing our emotional stress, and attention to the present moment. Which I think, obviously, that last one is the one we expect from meditation.
Right.
It's
I was
kind
like,
of,
oh, look, mindfulness.
yeah. I think though, clear seeing, I'm not surprised to think of it as as a result of meditation, but steadfastness was interesting. Um, and the experiencing of emotional distress rather than repressing it is in fact something I have had a love-hate relationship with, not just Buddhism but my therapist. And
Mm.
so
Mm-hmm.
uh, it's just one of those things you're like, I know, but I don't wanna. I know. you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that may actually one of the hardest parts. I mean that's what the whole chapter is about. To not, when things get uncomfortable, to not run away or try to suppress them, but be with them and just yeah, just be with them and be compassionate with them
Right.
and not do whatever else to distract yourself.
Right. And then as Pema puts it, to be steadfast with yourself, right? To keep going
Mm.
and not just give up. And she says, never underestimate our inclination to bolt when we hurt.
Yeah, that's so true.
And oh my gosh, I've absolutely experienced that. You're like you're meditating or and reflecting, trying not to reflect necessarily, but you're meditating, and this thing comes up, and you're like, oh, what if I just stop right now and get up and go do something distracting? um, let's see.
I mean,
Oh,
and this is really subtle. I mean, sometimes I'm doing things like just this afternoon I was getting something to eat, and I was
mm-hmm.
wondering, am I really hungry or am I just doing this to distract myself? So, yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes it's not perfectly clear what's going on.
I. In a perfect world, I would be more mindful about the things I eat and why I'm eating them. And in this way, I think I would probably eat less. Because frequently, how often, like you said, Ben, are we eating just to, or preparing food to distract ourselves, or because we're
Mm.
bored, And so, um, I like that she says, as we continue to sit, we see that meditation isn't about getting it right or attaining some ideal state. It's about being able to stay present with ourselves. And after you get this idea, this chapter can feel kind of repetitive in some ways, but I think that repetition is absolutely necessary. Um, and I don't think it's annoying as long as you're kind of coming at this with a bit of a beginner's mind. Um, I know sometimes I've read things and I get caught up in my idea of like, I already know. Jeez, why are we talking about this again?
Yeah, I mean, repetition is also part of the practice in a way
Mhm.
to really let those things settle in.
I'm trying to find it. I'm not trying to find things in the PDF compared to my physical book. This paragraph contains a very lovely and very basic meditation that if you have no practice and aren't sure how to get started, I think is a really great place to start. It's also, if you're out of practice, a really great way to do it as well. It reminds me of body scanning, which is taught in cognitive behavioral therapy. For especially, I use body scanning when I can't get to sleep at night, when my brain is like on fire, and so I just go through the parts of my body and try to be really aware of those parts and then move on to the next parts. And um, and just where you're bringing your awareness not just to your thoughts but to your body itself. As Pima puts it, sometimes we get so caught up in like all of the mind stuff of meditation that we forget we have a body to also be aware of.
I
Um,
shouldn't.
no, congrats.
Thanks. I tried really hard to remember I have a body.
I try really hard too, but also like being coming into my body has been a very important part of not just my practice, but also in my dealing with anxiety because anxiety is all in the mind. And so I have to rip myself from my mind sometimes
Yeah.
and throw myself into my body. Like this can be a very forceful like process. Um I made a
Get in there,
note.
Des.
Well, so I made a note to mention that this reminds me of when I was taking boxing classes. Um,
Go
Boxing was
on.
a really fat, huh?
Go on.
Boxing was a really fascinating experience for me because
Nice.
you had to be wholly in the moment, especially when you're sparring.
Oh yeah.
It like in a physical way, it brought me into my body in a way that I had literally never been. Because with like bicycling, I enjoy bicycling, but I can get up in my head while I'm biking. My body's
Mm.
doing something, but it's really easy to get in my head. Um, and I've done other workouts in the past and kind of the same thing. They're kind of easy to kind of do because it's just kind of a repetitious thing and you're kind of just um, you know, you're doing stuff, but your brain can go other places. But with boxing, I found that I had to be so fully in my body and aware of not just myself, but the person in front of me that I literally had never been in my so present before in this meat suit. And that was a fascinating part of my practice for a little bit. I do not do boxing any longer, but I still recall the sensation of what it felt like to um, kind of have that integration with who I am as a human meat suit. You know, meditation. We discover our inherent restlessness. Sometimes we get up and leave. So true. I know, like when I start meditating, sometimes it's like suddenly I'm aware of the 15 chores I need to get done.
Right.
I didn't want to do them before I was meditating, but now, now it's urgent.
Because now you can stop meditating.
If I just go do that thing now. And I love, she goes on to explain this idea of like training with kindness. Let's see. Yeah. By contrast, training with kindness results in someone who is flexible and confident, who doesn't become upset when situations are unpredictable and insecure. And I do find that over time, I have integrated more kindness into my brain. Not just for, other people, but also myself. And that's been a really important factor into being open minded about things, weirdly. Um, Being able to discuss things on a level that I don't think I was capable of before. And that might just also just be part of me getting older. Maybe my brain's just better.
That's it. Yeah.
She likens training our mind to that of a dog. One, you don't want to train it with fear and beatings because then you have an obedient but very inflexible creature. By training it with kindness, we get an obedient and flexible creature. Um, and I thought that that was a really like that was a very good parallel. I thought. Um, yeah. And we eventually obtain less self-deception. Here we go. Do 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 do. Remember, anytime, please interrupt if you've got a thought you'd like to share. I am just rolling through my own, and I'm trying to find a particular quote. It's down here somewhere. Found it. Meditation requires patience and maitri. If this process of clear seeing is based on self-compassion, it will become a process. If it isn't based on self-compassion, it will become a process of self-aggression. So once again, she hits on this idea of if done poorly or done with still attaching too much to certain narratives. I think that you become self-aggressive, you become self-abusive in many ways by trying to see it as like I need to be better. Because she's just talked about that clear sight where like suddenly maybe you feel like you're an angrier person, and reality is you're just becoming more aware of how angry you are as a person.
Hmm.
um, I've experienced that. I am a shockingly angry person. I really didn't think I was as angry as I
Yeah.
am. That was definitely a shock to my self image and the idea of who I thought I
Mm.
was realizing, wow, I'm really angry a lot. Like all the time. Wow.
So I know with meditation, like this idea that if you um, don't do it with compassion, it's like self regression. Like I've
Mhm.
definitely seen that in my own meditation at different points, where it almost feels like, yeah, you're trying to do it well, and instead of like accepting what's coming up, you're kind of like just like
Mm.
repressing it or cutting it out of the situation. Like,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah.
pesky bad emotions. Just
Ugh. Why can't they just
so.
leave me alone?
Hmm.
And then, to once again touch on our, like, we were talking about that idea of emptying your thoughts versus seeing them as they are. It's oops. I was trying to highlight this and I have failed. We are not trying to get rid of thoughts, rather, we are clearly seeing our defense mechanisms, our negative beliefs about ourselves, and our desires and expectations. But through this, we can also see our kindness, our bravery, and our wisdom. So,
Yeah.
yeah. She talks about the walls that build up in our minds, and I thought it was really interesting. She called this a claustrophobic situation, which is important for a warrior. Um, but I think it's also true. Like you become aware of how what's the saying? I didn't know how much I didn't know until I learned. Like you learn stuff and then you realize how much you didn't know about other stuff, right? That's why
Oh,
where the saying ignorance is bliss comes from. And so we can mark the beginning of longing for an alternative to our small familiar world. You realize like the limitations of what the way you've been existing. Um, so this is, hold on, I'm gonna find it because it's kind of perfect in my mind. Because it's really relevant to myself. Transformation occurs only when we remember, breath by breath, year after year, to move toward our emotional distress without condemning or justifying our experience. Um, and my God, is that really hard?
Yeah.
I know that oh my gosh, I could go on and on about how Des struggles with these things. Um, but she also points out that it's also really possible to kind of fall in love with our own misery. She doesn't put it that way, but that's the vibe I got, of like, who am I without these thoughts? Like, who do I become if I'm not the person filled with anxiety? If I'm not, you know what I mean? Or if I'm not the person. So, like,
Well, I mean, yeah, you become attached to that sort of pattern of thinking.
yeah,
It's that is who you are, at least in your own self-image.
there's a stupid fly near me. I want it to stop touching me. Go do your own thing on the other side of the room. Leave me alone. Um, you got this whole room and you're in my business. So she also briefly cuts into some of this seriousness with a something that's vaguely humorous of when people say, "I fall asleep all the time during meditation. What should I do?" And she says her favorite is experience anger.
Wow.
um, because these energy that's a lot, there's a lot of energy in anger.
Yeah.
A lot of people will scream or act out. So we get stuck in repetitive behavior that we become experts at getting all worked up. In this way, we continue to strengthen our painful emotions, which, stop calling me out. She gives a little anecdote about when her boyfriend cheated on her, and she was in a friend's house full of expensive things, and she wanted to throw something and break it, but everything she picked up costs like thousands of dollars, so she would set it back down. She was so mad she couldn't find an outlet, but then she found this situation so absurd that when she went outside, she cried and laughed. Which I was like, that is kind of an absurd situation to find yourself in, and yet how interesting as well. I can't just smash whatever I want. I have to be very conscious that like this is like half a year's paycheck to me. I need to not do that.
I'm
Um,
surprised she had the mental clarity to just not smash things anyway, because the thought, oh, but it's expensive, wouldn't necessarily occur to most people.
yeah, yeah.
When smashing what?
What?
Um,
What?
Pema, when she found out a boyfriend had broken up with her, she was so filled with rage
Oh
she just
yeah,
wanted to
okay.
break things. But everything at her friend's house was so expensive that she would just like pick it up and put it back down. But when we struggle against ourselves rather than like accepting them as we are, we reject the source of wisdom, which I thought was a really interesting thought to have about it. Because I don't think many of us consider the fact that any wisdom would come with such impulses or our negative feelings. But I think there is wisdom to be had in a lot of situations. I'm sure she learned a lot from that rage.
Yeah, I really have troubles with this paragraph because she says anger without the fixation is none other than clear seeing. Wisdom and pride without fixation is experience is equanimity. I don't really see that, how pride is really equanimity. That seems strange to me.
Um, I think personally, I think it comes down to so she says without fixation. So it's the pride without fixation. If you're feeling bolstered without being fixated on it being you, I think in that way
Oh.
it's easier to empathize with everyone around you and what their stance might be or what they might be feeling concerning whatever it is, if that makes sense.
So,
I think it makes sense if you take pride not as the sin of pride and more like just the concept of self respect,
Mhm.
like knowing what your needs are. Yeah.
right, it's hard to sort of separate the idea of the self focus from words like anger and pride, because those typically are very self centered, especially things like pride. Um, but if you can remove that fixation, as she puts it, it
Remove the self from the self respect that you
right,
have equanimity.
it expands and diffuses itself so that it's not this hot burning anger. It is a recognition that something is wrong. That's clear seeing wisdom. Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, anger is an interesting one because at the point at which anger really boils up to the surface is like it's the point that it's well past time for a change, usually in
Yeah.
my experience. So it very much is like an alarm system, like something needs to change here, something is
Mhm.
wrong. And that is a wise impulse, but like we've kind of caked this anger around it. And then we
Right.
cling to the anger and we make the anger like the focus rather than like what the anger means we need.
I think that I really like that you pointed that out, Sam, because I think when you look at all your brain thoughts and all the things that happen, your brain physically is designed to help you survive. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's its only objective. It's not to make you happy. It's not to help you find contentment in life. It's just to survive. And so, like you said, it is an alarm system, that anger at times. And yeah, so if we can remove the self fixation part, it can be a clear sighted, like, it's time for change. I think you're right on with that.
Woo.
Yes. She calls it the energy. Yeah, the energy of passion when it's free of grasping is wisdom and sees all the angles. Which, yeah, interesting, interesting stuff. Um, oh, what did she say here? Let me find it.
All I read was the
Thus,
fear is always lurking in our lives.
also true. Man, truth. The truth. The fear is always working in our lives. In sitting meditation, we practice dropping whatever story we are telling ourselves and leaning into the emotions and the fear. Thus, we train in opening the fearful heart to the restlessness of our own energy. She closes out this chapter by talking about the attention to the present moment, which isn't that what we all came here for?
Mm.
And how attending to our present moment, mind and body, is a way of being tender towards self, toward other, and towards the world, which I think is interesting. It is inherent in our ability to love. I'm always fascinated by every book I read, that so many books I've read, but every Buddhist re- related or Buddhist tangentially book that I've read really goes into how when you can open up properly and attend to the moment, it makes room for love. Um, and I think it is easy to get a very fixed and small idea of what kind of love they're talking about. And it's important to remember they're talking about a very big kind of love.
It's big with two G's.
Big. G-g. Oh my gosh. So, one thing I really liked about this paragraph is sometimes we find that we like our thoughts so much. So once again, touching on that idea of like we getting almost falling in love with our own narrative in that small way, that small kind of love. Like we get really fixated on our narrative. That watching our internal movie is a lot more entertaining than bringing our mind back home. Um, which I know that when when my monkey brain decides that it's time to be really anxious and depressed, I too get caught up in my internal movie.
Yeah.
um, and I want to watch that. And you know what I mean? It's like this very almost masochism that comes into it, where we just watch our own suffering over and over again.
Yeah. Like when I get depressed, sometimes I don't want to stop being depressed. I want to just keep reinforcing the fact that I'm depressed.
Yeah. It reminds me of in middle school when I would just listen to the same Evanescence album over and over
Yes.
again.
Yes.
and, and you're just like, wake me up inside.
Wow.
What, you, Max, you didn't have an Evanescence face?
Can't relate.
Wow. We are not the same.
We are not the
No.
same. The Evanescence face was real, man. It was real.
Yeah, I skipped the emo phase.
Oh, I didn't.
Yeah, I absolutely did not skip that phase. It lingers to this day.
um, really like how she says, yeah, it still lingers a little bit. Yeah, it's true. That's a mood, Sam. Um, but not deliberately blocking anything, by directly touching our thoughts and then letting them go with an attitude of no big deal, we can discover that our fundamental energy is tender, wholesome, and fresh. I like that she called it fresh. I don't know why it amused me, but it did. And that brings us to the end of the chapter.
Yay!
Yay. Thoughts? Or whatever.
In going over this chapter, because I of course did not read, um,
Sure.
I did remember quite a bit of it from when I read the book many years ago, because this was one of the chapters I think I kind of like stuck on and just read a few times over. Like,
Yeah.
so. Mhm.
Well, it's such a very to the point and good chapter. Like,
Yes.
I
It's got all those fresh insights, things that people just don't think to tell you, and you'll be hard pressed to discover on your own unless you intuit it somehow.
right. Yeah, and so often sometimes when I'm reading a chapter or if I'm rereading a chapter, I think to myself, if I was going to pick this chapter as like, all right, you don't have to read the whole book, but read this chapter, is it good for that? And I think this chapter is. If as just like a singular resource of like talking about meditation and getting a good idea of what that is encompassed on a whole rather than just on a how do I sit and quiet my mind.
Right.
Yeah.
So, as you've probably noticed, I'm a fan of Pima's writing style. So, I am
I'm
a
a
little
fan of
maybe
you,
biased.
Des.
Des. Cool beans.
I just ate some beans.
Many beans.
I have beans downstairs.
It's not the same.